The village slept in silence, the kind of silence that comes only in deep country, where no roads stretch far and no wheels pass in the dark. Dogs dozed by doorways, fires burned low, and children curled beneath patched blankets, their breath slow and even. All was still. And then the rooster cried. It came suddenly, a piercing note that split the night like a knife. Not at dawn, as roosters are meant to call, but at midnight, sharp and clear, ringing through the village when the moon stood high and the stars burned cold. At first, the sound startled only the parents. A few stirred from sleep, muttered curses at the bird, and turned in their beds. A rooster crowing too soon was no cause for alarm, merely an annoyance. But then the children woke. From house to house, across the narrow lanes and clustered yards, children sat upright in their beds. Some rubbed their eyes, others stared into the dark with wide, unblinking faces. And as their parents reached for them, whispering for them to lie down again, the children began to speak. They did not call for their mothers. They did not cry for water or whimper from dreams. They spoke names. Strange names. A boy of 6 whispered Veelslav. A girl of 8 murmured Marinka, daughter of Stepan. Another child, no more than 3, repeated Ilya, Ilya, Ilya as though calling someone back from far away. The parents froze. These were not the names of family, not of neighbors, not of anyone living in the village. The children's voices were steady, their tones oddly certain, as if the names were part of them. Who taught you that? A mother demanded, shaking her son gently, but he only stared past her, repeating the name again in a voice too calm for a child roused from sleep. In one house, a father struck the table with his hand. It is nonsense, he said, though his voice shook. Children say things in their sleep. Yet when he turned, he saw his daughter's lips forming a name no one had ever spoken in their family. Across the village, the same scene played out. Lamps were lit, shutters drawn back, whispers passed from house to house. Parents carried their children to hearths and tried to hush them, but the names kept spilling forth, soft and steady, until at last the rooster's cry faded into silence. And as the night returned to stillness, the children lay back down, closing their eyes without protest. Within moments they slept again, as if nothing had happened. But the parents could not sleep. They sat awake until dawn, staring into the shadows, their children's strange words echoing in their ears. And in every home, the same question gnawed at them. Whose names had their children spoken? The morning after the rooster's cry, the village moved more slowly than usual. Mothers carried water with red eyes, fathers walked to the fields with little appetite for work. Children ran and played as they always did, chasing one another between fences, their laughter high and careless. But the parents could not forget the night. At first, they told themselves it had been a dream. The hour was late, their minds fogged with sleep. Children often mumbled in their beds, and dreams could twist words into strange sounds. But when they gathered at the well and began to speak, they found that each house had woken to the same thing, the rooster's midnight cry, and the children whispering names no one knew. The names were not alike. Some were long and old, carrying the shape of other times. Others were plain, yet belonged to no one alive in the village or its neighboring hamlets. Fathers frowned, repeating them aloud, tasting the syllables as if to find sense in them. Mothers shook their heads, saying the sounds felt heavy, too certain to be nonsense. A few tried to question their children. "Do you remember what you said last night?" they asked gently. But the children only shrugged or laughed, denying knowledge. One boy insisted, "I never said that," though his mother swore she had heard his voice as clearly as if it were spoken now. Another girl fell silent when pressed, her eyes lowering to the ground, as if something within her resisted the memory. The elders muttered among themselves. They remembered fragments of old sayings, stories passed down in hushed voices, that a rooster crowing at midnight was a warning, a sign that boundaries had been crossed. Some claimed it meant a death approaching, others said it was the hour when the living and the dead stood closest together. None agreed, but all looked uneasy. By the second night, fear grew sharper. Parents lay awake waiting, ears straining against the dark. When the rooster cried again, as it had before, they rose with pounding hearts. And once more the children stirred, sat upright, and whispered names that belonged to no one alive. This time, the parents tried to hush them. Mothers pressed hands against small mouths, fathers pulled their children close, whispering their true names again and again, as if to anchor them. But the children resisted gently, pushing the hands aside, their lips moving still, speaking the strange names with calm certainty. When dawn came, the children returned to their games, unaware. But the parents avoided one another's eyes, carrying a new weight. It was no dream, no fever. Something had entered their homes with the midnight crow of the rooster, and it was speaking through their children. By the third night, it was no longer just a handful of children. When the rooster crowed at midnight, the sound carried farther, sharper, as if the bird itself had grown louder. This time nearly every house stirred. Parents sat up at once, bracing themselves, waiting. And one by one, from bed to bed, the children woke and began to speak. At first the names came softly, whispered like secrets. Then they grew clearer, surer, as though each child had practiced them many times. No two voices carried the same name. In one house a boy said Gavril Ivanovich. In another, a girl no older than 4 murmured Darya of the mill. In a third, a pair of brothers spoke together, not their own names, but 2 others in unison, as if answering some roll call. The parents listened, stricken. They knew everyone in the village and many in the towns beyond, yet these names belonged to no one living. Some sounded ancient, strange on the tongue, as if they belonged to a time when the village had not yet been built. Others were eerily ordinary, but still carried no owner anyone could recall. By day, the parents wrote the names down on scraps of paper, trying to make sense of them. They filled whole lists, long columns of unfamiliar names. Yet the more they gathered, the heavier the mystery grew. It was not one child or one family. It was all of them. The children, when asked, denied it. They laughed, confused, insisting they remembered nothing. A few looked troubled, as if shadows lingered in their minds, but they could not explain. They returned to their games, climbing fences, running through the lanes, their voices as bright as ever. Only at night did the change come. The elders grew uneasy. They sat together in the square, turning the names over on their tongues. Some muttered they belonged to the dead, though no one could trace them to the graves in the churchyard. Others feared they came from farther away, from beyond the river, from villages long forgotten, from mouths that had long ago fallen silent. And still the names spread. Each night, the rooster cried, and each night more voices joined in. Soon, all the children of the village were speaking, their tones flat and certain, as if possessed by knowledge that did not belong to them. The air at midnight became heavy with whispers, dozens of small voices rising together, filling the darkness with names that no living tongue had any reason to carry. The parents listened with terror, unable to silence them all. The sound of those strange names crawled through the rafters, through the lanes, through the square itself. It was no longer the voices of children they heard, it was something older, heavier, speaking through them. And though the words faded when dawn came, the unease remained, like a shadow no sun could drive away. Fear makes neighbors turn into strangers. By the 4th week of the rooster's midnight cries, the village no longer spoke with one voice. The names had spread too far, the children too deeply touched by them. Every family had heard their own child whisper a name that did not belong to the living. Some households tried to ignore it, insisting the children were dreaming, or speaking words they had overheard without meaning. Others clung to superstition, saying the children were touched by the dead, carrying voices from the other side. Arguments spilled from houses into the square. The rooster is cursed, some said. Kill it, and the voices will end. But others crossed themselves, whispering that the bird was only a messenger. If we silence it, worse will follow. A warning ignored always brings punishment. Mothers quarreled at the well, their children clinging to their skirts. One accused another of lying, of inventing the story of names to frighten the rest. The accused mother struck back with tears in her eyes. Would I invent a voice that came from my own daughter's mouth? Fathers clashed in the tavern. One slammed his fist on the table, declaring the children bewitched. Another swore it was a sickness, something of the mind or blood, nothing more. The arguments grew loud, until men who had once worked side by side would no longer share a cup. The children themselves were caught in the middle, confused by the tension. By day, they played as if nothing had changed, though sometimes their games grew strange. They called each other by the midnight names, shouting them in the lanes, laughing without knowing why. Parents dragged them indoors, shuddering at the sound, but the children only giggled, untroubled, as if the new names belonged as much to them as the ones they were born with. The elders shook their heads. This is how it begins, they muttered. A village divided cannot endure. Yet even among them, no agreement could be found. Some believed the voices were gifts, signs that the dead still remembered the living. Others feared they were claims, that the dead were pulling at the children, trying to take them across. And always, at the center of every quarrel, was the rooster. By day it scratched and strutted like any other bird, crowing at dawn as it should. But when the night came, and the moon hung high, its cry broke the dark once more. The sound split the village, half cursing it, half praying to it, none able to stop listening. The division deepened with each passing night. And though the people still drew water together, still sowed and reaped side by side, an invisible line had grown between them, sharp as a knife. It was only a matter of time before the names would test that line beyond repair. It happened on a night colder than the rest, when frost had begun to silver the edges of windows and the moon hung bright and thin above the fields. The parents, already worn from sleepless weeks, lay tense in their beds, waiting for what they now dreaded. No one in the village truly slept before midnight anymore. When the rooster cried, it was different. The sound was louder, harsher, stretched out until it seemed to rattle the walls. It was not one crow, but three, one after the other, echoing through the lanes like a bell tolling. People sat upright at once, hearts pounding, knowing this night would not pass like the others. And then the voices began. Not one house, not one bed, not a handful of children. This time, every child in the village stirred at once. From the youngest who had barely learned to speak to the oldest standing at the edge of youth, they all sat upright, eyes wide open, and opened their mouths together. The names poured out like a flood. Dozens of voices rose in unison, yet none said the same name. The air filled with them, spilling through windows and doors, echoing off the wooden walls, carrying across the square. Some voices were calm, some urgent, some broken by sobs, but none belonged to the children themselves. Parents rushed to hush them, pressing hands over small mouths, shaking shoulders, calling their true names. But the children did not stop. Even muffled by palms, the words kept spilling out, unstoppable. Mothers wept, begging their sons and daughters to return to themselves. Fathers shouted until their throats were raw, but the names drowned every plea. Outside, the sound grew unbearable. It was no longer the scattered whispers of strange syllables, but a great chorus of voices, speaking as if answering a call no living ear could hear. The square seemed alive with names that had no owners. The church bell, silent and cold, shook faintly in its tower, as if the air itself pressed against it. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The children closed their mouths, lay back down, and within moments were breathing evenly, lost again in sleep. The silence that followed was heavier than the cries had been. Parents stood over their beds, trembling, unable to move, listening to the faint rustle of the rooster settling back on its perch. No one slept for the rest of that night. The whole village sat in kitchens and by hearths, whispering the names they had heard, trying to recall them all. The list was endless. Some were names no one had ever spoken before, others carried echoes, like names carved into gravestones that had long since crumbled. By dawn, one truth pressed itself into every mind: whatever had taken hold of the children was no accident, no fever, no trick of dreaming. It was something larger than the village, larger than life itself. And the rooster's cry had only been the beginning. By morning, the village was hushed. Smoke rose from chimneys, water was drawn from the well, bread was baked as always, but no one spoke above a whisper. The memory of the night still clung to every wall, every doorway. It was not only the names that haunted them, but the way the voices had risen together, as if some great gathering had taken place in the darkness, one that the living were powerless to dismiss. The elders met in the square, summoned by fear more than by choice. They sat with their cloaks wrapped tight against the chill, their faces grave, their hands shaking not from age alone. For years they had been keepers of stories, of warnings passed down, half believed. Now, with the children at stake, the past was no longer a matter of curiosity, it was the only place to seek answers. It was old Daniel, bent and nearly blind, who finally spoke what the others hesitated to say. His voice cracked, but carried steady. "This has happened before." The younger men leaned in, hungry and afraid. The old women crossed themselves. Daniel told of a famine, long ago, in a village by another river. He said that one winter, when the hunger was worst, the children there began to wake in the night. A rooster had cried at an hour no rooster should, and afterward the children spoke names, hundreds of them, names not belonging to anyone still alive. They spoke them for weeks, until the famine broke. But the children never forgot. They grew, Daniel rasped, but the names stayed with them. They carried them in their mouths, in their dreams. Some could not marry, for they spoke their betrothals with other names. Some could not bear children, for their lips whispered strange syllables over the cradles. And some left, walking away from their village without farewell, as though answering a call no one else could hear. The crowd shuddered. Mothers clutched their children closer, fathers muttered that it was only story, only fear talking. Yet in their hearts, they recognized the weight of what he said. If it had happened before, then it was not sickness. Not madness. It was something older, something that returned when the time was ripe. No one dared speak of killing the rooster now. No one dared speak of silencing the children. For the names were not theirs to command, and the rooster was not just a bird, it was the herald of something beyond their walls. That night, the villagers did not wait for sleep. They sat awake in silence, listening for the cry they knew would come. And when the rooster called again at midnight, their fear was doubled, not only for what it summoned, but for the knowledge that such cries had been heard before, and might be heard again long after they were gone. The rooster did not crow at midnight forever. One night it cried, and the children spoke their names, the next night it did the same, but after a time, the sound ceased. Without warning, the bird returned to its proper hour, greeting the dawn as it always had. The village waited in silence. The first night it did not call, then again the second, but no cry came. Relief should have followed. Yet it did not. For though the rooster was silent, the children remembered. Some stopped speaking the names, as if the spell had lifted. But others whispered them still, in their sleep, in play, even when scolded into silence. Mothers wept when they heard their daughters calling softly to shadows, not with the names given at birth, but with those that had come at midnight. Fathers struck the tables in anger, insisting their sons must forget, yet even they trembled when the words returned again and again, steady as breath. The village tried to move on. Nets were cast, fields were tilled, bread was baked. But the air was never as light as before. When the children ran in the lanes, parents listened too closely, flinching whenever strange syllables slipped out in their games. At the well, women avoided speaking of it, though each carried the same weight. In the tavern, men grew quieter, their cups drained without laughter. Years passed, and the children grew. Some seemed untouched, their strange nights of speaking fading into memory. But others never shook free. They carried those names like shadows. One girl, on her wedding day, spoke another's name instead of her groom's before the whole village. The union was never completed. A boy who became a man left one morning without farewell, walking the road with steady steps, his lips moving as if repeating a name none could hear. The rooster itself grew old and died, buried without ceremony behind a shed. Another bird took its place, crowing at dawn as all roosters should. But no one in the village forgot that once, at midnight, it had cried, and the dead, or something like them, had answered through their children's mouths. And so, even long after, when a rooster crowed strangely in the dark, mothers would wake at once and press their hands over their children's lips, whispering their true names again and again, as if to anchor them in the world of the living. The children of that season never fully belonged only to their village. Part of them had spoken for someone else. And no one alive could say whether that part had ever gone back to sleep.